Hello, I'm Graham and I hope everyone's having a great day. Welcome to a new series of tutorials for users to the Panasonic Lumix FZ2000 or 2500. For sake of clarity, I'm just going to refer to this as the FZ2000. Now, the FZ2000 is the updated version of the FZ1000, which has been around for a couple of years now. Now, the FZ2000 adds features to the FZ1000, just like the FZ300 added features to the FZ200. Essentially, it's the same image quality in the 200 as 300, but the 300 adds that extra touchscreen, better viewfinder, better handling, and of course it shoots 4K. So the upgrade from the 200 to the 300 was a fantastic upgrade. And the 300 is a fantastic camera if you want a 1/2 inch sensor with that extra longer reach. So the FZ300 is a great camera if you want that extra reach. Now, the FZ2000 is the upgrade to the 1000, and again it adds that touchscreen, a better OLED EVF, and essentially has more video capabilities than the existing FZ1000. It's almost the scaled down version of Panasonic Lumix GH4 camera. It's a subset of the video capabilities of that camera. So in this series we're going to be looking at how to set this camera up to get good stills and how to get good video. Now, in this first video I want to look over the controls of the camera and give you some ideas of the capabilities of the programmable features that you can assign to this camera to give you the best possible shooting conditions for whatever subject that you want to shoot. So if you're a videographer, you may want to set up the camera to give you videography settings, or if you're a still shooter, again you might want to set this camera up to give you the best possibility of getting shots with the stills mode. So let's have a look over the camera, look at some of the programmable features and how we can set this camera up. In the next video we'll be looking at shooting in the IA mode and how you can get some fantastic shots in both stills and video, even though you've got a very limited subset of the operational features of the camera. In the second video we'll be looking at shooting in the program auto mode, and that opens up a lot more possibilities for both creative photography and videography. And in later videos we'll be looking at the semi-automatic modes of shutter priority, aperture priority, and then the full manual mode in both stills and creative video mode. So hopefully there's a lot to get through and hopefully you'll learn something along the way. So let's have a look over the camera, look at some of the buttons and features that you might not already be accustomed to. So this is the FZ2000 camera, and as you can see it's quite a large camera. It's almost the size of an entry-level DSLR, but you are getting the functionality of a 24 to 480mm effective focal length lens within the camera body. Now the body itself contains the 1-inch sensor, and the 1-inch sensor is now responsible for giving you better low light photography and videography, as well as increased dynamic range. So the camera itself, when you turn the camera on, it fully extends the lens, and all the subsequent zoom is contained within the camera lens itself. So the camera extends to its full extent, and if you do any subsequent zooms it's all internal. So with this setup you're not going to be the photographer that merges in with the crowd. You are going to stand out if you are going to be using this in public places because of this long extension to the lens. It does mean that the camera internal focusing is nice and quiet and protected from the elements to a certain degree. It's by no means a weatherproof camera, as I found out with this particular one, as I got water in the lens from a slight accident that I had with this particular camera. So be aware it's not dustproof and waterproof, the same as the FZ300. So let's have a quick look around the camera and identify some of the component parts that you may not be familiar with. Now the lens head is a vented lens head. It looks quite professional looking. Bayonet cap to locate it. The lens itself has a 68mm thread, and here I fitted a UV filter. Now if you're going to spend this amount of money on this camera, it's worth getting a good quality UV filter if you want to protect your lens. I would only use this in a situation where there's dust or salt spray, as I don't like fitting extra air to glass surfaces The lens has been designed to give you the best optical quality, and no matter what glass you put in front of it, you are going to see a slight amount of degradation, either through image flare or ghosting. So in most circumstances, it's better not to use a filter if you can get away with it. If you are worried about damage to the front element of the lens, then by all means fit your own UV filter, and possibly the best you can get to give you the best chance of getting no image degradation. So that is a UV filter, 68mm diameter for this particular camera. The microphones for the camera are on top of the flash housing. Not the best location for a pair of stereo mics, but within the camera itself, the only placement I guess the designers could fit it. On the top of the camera, we've got the drive dial, which gives you the settings for stills all the way through to stop motion animation and 4K. So that's the drive dial. Here we've got the mode dial, which allows us to select between the fully automatic IA modes and the manual video and manual stills mode. Two control dials on this camera, which in most cases are identically operated. So if you're in the aperture priority mode, then both the front dial and the rear dial will adjust the aperture. If you're in the shutter priority mode, the front and rear dials both control the shutter speed. If you're in the manual mode, then the front one you can assign to aperture and the rear one shutter, or if you prefer, you can swap those around. You can have this for the shutter and the rear one for the aperture. Lots of programmable features with this camera. By default, F4 gives you exposure compensation, both for daylight and your flash exposure compensation are brought up when you use the function 4 button, and the control is with the front dial. On the front of the camera we've got our shutter release, again a two-stage, halfway down to focus, fully depressed to take the photograph, although there is a setting you can make the camera take the exposure once you reach that halfway focus point. Zoom lever, which is 2-speed, so a slight rotation gives you slow speed, full rotation gives you fast speed. So we've got 2-speed, both zoom to wide and zoom to tele. Video record button, which is normally the red button, but I stuck a little jewel on there so it gives me a little bit more profile, so I can feel that when I'm shooting video. In the red button mode, I can actually feel the surface of the button rather than trying to find the indentation that the red button normally has. So that's a little jewel that I picked up in a craft shop, and it's self-adhesive, just sticks to the top of the button, and if I wanted to sell the camera onwards, then I just peel that button off, no problem at all. Power on off button and a LED to give you an indication of power on. Around the back of the camera we have the new EVF for this camera, which is a high resolution OLED device. On the side of the housing we have the latch for the flash release, and it's again a Cobra style flash which pops up like so. If you are shooting flash with this particular camera, even though the flash extends up to give you less of a chance of capturing red eye, you will notice that you'll get some shading in the wide angle mode from the lens hood itself. You'll notice shading on the bottom of your images. So if you're shooting flash with the camera, remove the lens hood and then shoot your flash photography, put your lens hood back at the end of the time, just latch it in place. Normally there is a hot shoe cover, but I find that inconvenient, and I'm likely to lose it, so I've just put that back into the box. So if I do sell this camera on, I can just replace the hot shoe cover when I sell the camera. On the side of the EVF is the diopter control, and that allows you to set the diopter of the EVF so you've got a sharp focus of the screen itself. Now it's better to set that up on one of the menus rather than trying to look at an image, so just bring up a menu by pressing menu set and then look into the viewfinder, adjust the diopter until you get a sharp image in the display. Now there is an optical switch in the EVF so that when you bring this up to your eye, it switches off the LCD monitor and switches on the EVF. There's also a functionality that you can actually start it to focus when you're bringing it up to your eye to try and get some quicker focus response. The actual screen itself is still the articulated touch and turn and you can fold it back to the camera for protection. It's now a touch screen, so you've got the facilities for touch to focus, so you can actually do focus pulls with this. You can touch different points of the screen if you're in the video mode, and it will actually follow that focus. You've also got facilities to then change your menu options, change settings in the camera. I like touch screens. A lot of people don't because of the mess from grease on fingers, but if you use a stylus, you don't get those problems. Also, with this particular screen, you can use the EVF, and you can actually use the screen to set focus. So you can actually use your thumb while it's up to your eye to set the focus point where you need it to be. So it's a very convenient way of getting nice focus to make sure you're focusing on the subject you want. Top of the camera, we've got the multi-way switch for the focus modes between AFS, which is the autofocus single, and AFF. You set that operation in the menu, so you can either have AFS, which is single shot, or AFF, which is the autofocus flexible mode. Now the AFF mode is there so that when you press the shutter button to the halfway point, the camera will continue to focus if your subject position changes, where in the AFS mode it's a single shot. Once you press the button and get the halfway point, the camera will lock focus at that point and lock the exposure. We also have the AFC, the autofocus continuous mode, so when you're focusing, the camera will continuously focus until you press the shutter button. And the bottom option is the manual focus. Here in the middle of that is a button which we can program for AF or AE lock, or we can lock both focus and exposure, or we can individually set focus or exposure with this button, so you can emulate back button focus if you wanted to with the camera. Again, a series of programmable features on the back of the camera, and we can have the replay button, menu set, plus the four-way navigation key, which we'll cover a little bit later. We've also got a programmable button at the bottom of the screen, function 6, which is the normal button we would use for return and the trash can delete images. Again, we've got a switch over on the right hand side here, which is the EVF monitor switch, so you can actually manually switch between the LCD and the OLED display. Now on the side of this lens barrel we've got three programmable switches, and by default function 1 and function 2 are the slow speed zoom. Function 1 is zoom in and function 2 is zoom out. And again, these can be programmed for one of three speeds: low, medium or high. And again, you can set the operation of these so that you've got a soft start zoom and a soft finish if you wanted to, or you can push to hold to make it zoom with a soft finish or a soft start. So lots of nice features here for programming your video zooms if you want to do that within your video. Function 3 allows you to reassign the front and rear dials temporarily. So by default these will be dependent on your mode control. So if you're in aperture priority, these will control the aperture, but you can change the way that this button works. When you press this normally, it will bring up the operation between ISO and white balance, but if you didn't want that preference, you can change the programmability of this button to give you a number of features, maybe flash control or photo style or switching to 4K video. You can again program about 12 features behind the function 3 button. Again, on the lens barrel we have now a switch for the inclusion of internal ND filters, 1/4, 16th or 64th reduction in light to the sensor, or you can have it in auto. Now when we talk about video and stills, there are some caveats with this switch. In some modes the auto mode doesn't actually include the ND filter set. So in some situations you might think that you're going to be using the ND filters in an auto situation, but in the auto mode the actual filter set don't work. So we will show you how to overcome that in a later video. Bottom of the camera, of course, we have the tripod mounting bush, and it is on axis with the lens, which is great. Usual battery compartment for the BLC 12E battery, so it's a similar battery to most of the Panasonic bridge cameras. The 300 and the 200 all use that BLC 12E battery. Nice to see that we've got a separate compartment for the SD card, and again it's SD, SDHC or SDXC compatible cards. If you're shooting stills, then you can use SD. The choice of card for videography will depend on the video bitrate that you're using and the format. So for something like 4K, you need to be using a UH3 rated card. If you're just going to be shooting 1080p and AVC HD, you can get away with a class 4 SDHC card if you're only shooting AVC HD. But we'll talk about those cards in more detail when we talk about shooting video. Top of the camera here we have the focus assist light, and if you're using the self-timer mode, this will give you an indication of the countdown. Two rings on the lens barrel, one controls the zoom and the other controls the focus. They are fly-by-wire devices. They don't physically connect to the zoom mechanism or the focus mechanism of the lens. The zoom ring can actually be changed from being a fine control to a step mode, so you can actually step out from preset values, say 24, 35, 60, 75, dependent on how you want to set that up. So it can either be step zoom or fine control. On the left hand side of the camera we have the input for your microphone, standard 3.5mm jack stereo input. Now behind this door we've got the micro HDMI port and the USB socket, so you can connect this to an external recorder or a monitor to view your output. It's a clean HDMI output, so you can actually record from this device. Behind this port we've got a headphone socket, so we can actually monitor our audio as we go along. On the other side of the camera we've got another port behind this rubber flap, which is the 2.5mm remote control socket if you're using a wired remote release. Camera supports Wi-Fi control with the Panasonic Image app, or you can use the wide release if you want to use this for remote control of both stills and video. So that covers the feature sets of the camera itself, and we'll go through each of those buttons in turn when we start to look at shooting with the camera and be able to show you how to program those buttons. Now if you're shooting 4K with this camera, you will notice that you get a reduction in field of view from your 1080p mode. You lose something like 12mm effective focal length, so it goes from 24 up to about 36 as the minimum in 4K video. In a later video I'll show you how you can get some of that back by using a 0.43 wide angle converter for this particular lens size, and you can actually get back to something like 28mm to recover some of the field of view you lose by shooting in 4K mode. But more of that when we talk about shooting video with this particular camera, especially if you're going to shoot in the 4K mode. So those are some of the features of the camera, some of the buttons that are programmable and allow you to set the camera up so that it's useful for your own particular type of photography or videography. Well, that's it for the first video, and I hope you found that useful. Of course, if you're a new viewer, please do click the subscribe button and that bell notification icon, and then you'll be notified when I upload the second and subsequent videos in this series. Also, check out my photographic blog. There's lots more information on there about these type of cameras, and on the home page is the application to join my newsletter group. Now, that newsletter is more than a newsletter, it's almost a technical publication in its own right. I publish technical information on there that doesn't appear in my blog as well. So have a look at that, and if you're a new viewer, please do subscribe to that newsletter. So until my next video, thanks again for watching, please do take care, and I hope to see you all in my next video. Goodbye for now.